Joachim reporting there now for analysis on this story. Let's bring in Alberto Alemanno, who joins us via Skype. He's an EU law professor at HEC Paris. Thank you so much for being with us. How likely is it that this coalition could actually last? Of course, the two parties were once bitter adversaries, as we heard in that report, and some observers do say that the cracks are already there.
Well, let me start by saying that the outcome, or the likely outcome of this Italian political crisis, is pretty paradoxical. The man who had the most to gain from it, Mr. Salvini, who actually provoked the crisis, finds himself out of government. And certainly he's going to make sure that this government might not actually last for long. So possibly the major obstacle to the current government, to the new government, the incoming government, will come more from Salvini and from the inside the coalition. Having said so, obviously the Partito Democratico that has been at the opposition over the last year and a half, and Partito 5 Stelle, which is a movement, have very little to share, at least on paper. These two parties have been enemies. They have very different political histories. They have a very different political electorate. But at the same time, when you look a bit deeper, you see that they have similar political sensitivities. They want to protect those who are most vulnerable in the Italian society. They want to protect the environment. And on this basis, they are going to try over the next few hours to bring together those common sensibilities towards a common political legislative agenda. And Mr. Conte, who is also an expected winner of this political crisis, will be pivotal in making sure these two political parties can find a common minimum denominator that will enable this government to actually deliver all those policy reforms that the previous government, the one that just ended in Italy, was not able to deliver. So in a way, this is going to be a new political government. Many people would have not expected this, but the way in which Giuseppe Conte accepted this new mandate by the President of the Republic seems to suggest that this government is very ambitious, wants to be pro-European, is very multilateral in the way in which we interact with the international scene, and he wants to solve the real deep problems of Italy as a country. So the ambitions are very, very high. But obviously the question is to what extent this legislative joint program could be there.
I'm just going to interrupt you there for another question, if I may. Do you think the two parties, you just referred to them as enemies, can actually overcome one of their main stumbling blocks that they're currently facing? Of course, that one of those issues is the disagreement that they have on the top cabinet team. More briefly, if you can. Well,
the impression we got from Giuseppe Conte this morning when he left the Quirinale is that he wants to make sure that this new government is going to be made by new, fresh faces. We're not going to see many old politicians, members of the two parties, but we're going to see many technocrats, many people who have not necessarily been in politics for long, who might be coming from other institutions, the EU or the Banca d'Italia, many authoritative institutions, and played a role that we often define technocratic. So people who know and they're competent in those specific fields. And I think the choice of those individuals will be crucial also for the duration of this party, because the government has to be very credible vis-a-vis the international partners, but also vis-a-vis the different stakeholders in Italy itself.
I do want to move on and speak about Matteo Salvini, because, of course, his anti-government, anti-immigrant even party has lost power. But this doesn't necessarily mean that he's been completely removed from the scene, does it?
Well, far from it. Mr. Salvini certainly took a huge bet when he triggered this political crisis a few weeks ago without necessarily having a plan B besides trying to get snap elections. And now, obviously, the facts and the way in which parliamentary democracy works in Italy are making him a hero of those who don't like the government to come. And he will certainly catch up in terms of his own consensus vis-a-vis his own electorate. Having said so, his bravery might actually also backfire. So he might actually lose part of this electorate who might not have liked the fact that he interrupted a political experience that created a lot of expectations in Italy. So I have mixed feelings in thinking about Salvini's legacies in this government and thinking about his own future at the opposition. He has already said that this government has been decided in Biarritz during the G7 by other political leaders, which obviously doesn't sound very plausible, but he's certainly working very hard with incredible, powerful storytelling in order to create a narrative that this government cannot last too long because it goes
I'm
against...
just going to interrupt you again, just for one brief question, if I can, and this time, if you can keep it brief, we'll be very grateful. Because the way it's looking, of course, we know that Italy has for now avoided another election, but a lot of observers are saying that the country is certainly not still out of the woods yet, is it? Can you keep it a little bit more brief?
There's no doubt that this government will have to test himself during the next few months because the fall will be very difficult for the budget law that has to be decided, the VAT decision. So in a few months, probably in early 2020, we're going to see whether the Italians will have to go to elections. It happened in the past. We had at least 3 or 4 legislatures that lasted only 2.5 years. So this is a possibility, certainly, no doubt.
Alberto ALEMANNO, thank you so much for that very interesting analysis here on France 24.